and presentations. I want to stop and thank Rachel for inviting me here, as well as the AMRI leadership. As Rita said yesterday, we talk about the biological sciences, and what I focus on is the social sciences. So thank you for including me in your world. It's truly an honor. I want to talk quickly about some logistics. I want to talk about the objectives for today. So the one is to openly discuss and question gender equality in academia, in science, and perhaps in life. But the second thing that I want to do is for all of us to gain this understanding of emotional intelligence and a gender intelligence. The third is to be inspired into action, right? Understanding that we all have the potential of being leaders. And fourth is to understand that we can do more together than we can alone. And lastly is, let's have some fun. Talking about emotional intelligence and gender equality can be like talking about religion. So let's have some fun with this. We're here collectively, we're here together. So I'll start from there. Now, as I said, I was so inspired by all of the presentations yesterday, and hearing Rita speak. At one point in my career, I did some research in water because I love research. I'm going to, bear with me for one moment, I'm going to share my slides. Hold on.
Lauri, would you like some of us to have our cameras on?
Yes, if you could, that would be great. All right. So you can see me and you can see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Great, okay. I love research, and this started when I was actually a preteen. I grew up in the countryside of Pennsylvania, and it continued. I was in the Peace Corps in Togo, West Africa when I was in my 20s. And when it was 35 degrees and hot, I would go to the Peace Corps Bureau library, not just because it had air conditioning, although I did like that and appreciate it. It was because of the research. It was a library full of research on the environment, on public health, on education, on microloans, and I loved reading it. And this continued a number of years ago. I was at an organization that was co-founded by Esther Duflo, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics last year. It was an organization, she founded JPAL at MIT, and the sister organization was called Innovations for Poverty Action, that was hosted at Yale. And what it did was apply rigorous research to the development world using the concept of the randomized controlled trial. So I saw firsthand and was able to be a part of an organization that was growing very quickly, that used research to influence policy. So I appreciate you, I acknowledge you for the work that you do. You have the opportunity to change public health, to save people's lives. So hands down to you. Thank you for the work you do. And my love of research continues to this day. Now, this image is a cardinal, and it's a female cardinal. And what I read about a month or two ago is that in the field of ornithology, there is now gender equality, which is like, great, there's gender equality in ornithology. But the exciting part is not that there's gender equality in the field of ornithology. The exciting part is about the research that happened, that came about when there was when more females started to enter the field of ornithology. Because here's what happened. So 20, 30 years ago, most of the people who studied ornithology were males from the Northern Hemisphere. And And it wasn't until there were more female ornithologists studying birds that, in particular, they realized that female birds sing. And because prior to this, male ornithologists really mainly focused on male bird song. So we have females coming in, and all of a sudden we realize that female birds sing. They sing to their partners, they sing to their young. Various birds, female birds sing more than others in various parts of the world. So the exciting part was not necessarily that there's gender equality or gender parity in the field of ornithology. It's the research, it's the output that happened because of it. The research became more robust. It became more thorough. And this work, this type of work is what I do. So I speak and I advise around the world with a variety of different types of organizations on two things. So the one is this, what we call it, a gender intelligence. And the second one is on emotional intelligence. Now, both of these can be learned, which I'll discuss later on. And as Rachel said, what I'm passionate about, I mean, there's two things, is that one, females are recognized for their contribution. And the second thing is that all individuals have the chance to improve our emotional intelligence for the sake of our well-being. And this is a conversation that we are in the beginning or middle of a pandemic. And the people that I'm talking to really want to have this conversation about our overall well-being. And I know that you, as women and men, or however you define yourself, you here today, at least you're curious about this. And at best, you're also committed to it. So with that, I have a question. And this was part of the homework from yesterday when we left yesterday's AMRI meeting. So my first question is, who do you think is a great leader? So who in your life do you consider to be a great leader? And this is someone that you know, so not Buddha or Allah or Jesus, it's someone that you know, and then someone who inspired you to be the person you are today. And what I'd like you to do, if you feel comfortable, is to include this in the chat. So for example, for me, I had a wonderful, when I think I was in 6th grade, I had a wonderful teacher, Mrs. Fisher. And she was a great leader who inspired me to be the person I am today. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Mrs. Fisher. So she, in 6th grade, she introduced her class to the Scarlet Letter. She introduced a class to Little Women, and she introduced the class to a book by Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own. So while she didn't talk about feminism or gender equality, she was definitely exposing me to books that I hadn't been exposed to before and authors I hadn't been exposed to before. So who in your life is a great leader? Do you consider to be a great leader? So Catherine shared that her first postdoc supervisor and her high school principal. And I can't remember if I said this in the beginning, but I will say it again. I am hoping that this session is interactive. It is meant to be interactive. Maria Celine, she said, an older woman who was my mentor during my PhD. My mother, from Carolyn. My postdoc supervisor. Postdoc supervisor, thank you, Jerome. My Yoda mentor when postdoc, my mom. I'm just reading these as they're coming in now. My postdoc advisor for creating a positive group atmosphere, visionary leadership, and kindness. Another one, my mother. My master supervisor. My grandmother. My crazy scientist, high school biology teacher. I had a crazy chemistry high school teacher. He was up there as well. My physics teacher in high school. Thanks, Anders. My dad, for being always positive and believing in employees, saying a good atmosphere is more important than efficiency. Wow. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question. So how did this person make you feel? How did this person make you feel? So for example, my English teacher in 6th grade, she made me feel, I was not an athletic child. I was, as I said, I love research before I became athletic older in life. So she made me feel like I was intelligent. She made me feel like it was important to be curious. So we have inspired to deal with beauty in research. Made work feel fun, secure, and proud. We're going to read the things that are coming in. Confident and curious and skeptical, even more than I am naturally. Maria, seen, heard that I was complete, smart, and my thought mattered. Karen, confident, curious, and happy. Curious and work hard. She made me feel strong and she made me feel great and empowered about being weird as I am. I'm right there with you. My mother made me feel like it was okay to be myself. Also the director at a theater where I grew up accepted every single strange and different person. Feel free to keep the chats coming in. I'm going to move on to the next question. Stefan said, inspired and amazed. These are great. These are inspiring. And then the last question is, so what attributes did this person have? So how would you describe this person? So for example, my teacher, she was a visionary. I mean, she did introduce me to books that were written by female authors. She was smart. She was also smart. And I'm actually reading Anders as I'm talking, and she was also kind. She also could connect with me, right? She had this ability to, she was truly interested in me and my well-being and my knowledge. So we have, I will read some of these coming in: open, patient, lots of empathy, compassionate, honest, committed, kind, patient and kind, engaged, compassionate, humor, self-reflection, compassionate. So we're seeing some themes. We're seeing compassionate, we're seeing smart, open, inviting, listening, encouraging, unconventional, positive, good listener. So patient and kind. So when we hear all of this, right, all of your responses, what we're hearing and what we're talking about is somebody who had a high degree of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence meaning they had access to their emotions and they could use that to guide their actions and their behavior. Now I'm going to give a brief overview of how emotional intelligence works. So let's talk about two areas. We're going to talk about the limbic system and the rational system. So the limbic system was the first to develop. It's where we store hunches and intuition. It's our fight and flight response. And this is when a situation happens, anything happens, it first enters or is recognized by the limbic system. So it's not something to ignore, but it's not something to run our lives by. Now, then if we go over to the rational system, because the rational develops later on. This is where we have planning and decision-making. And the idea with emotional intelligence is, can we use both of these? Can we use our limbic system and the rational to inform our actions and behavior? So for example, because something comes in through our spinal cord, it hits our limbic system. If we are driven by our fight or flight responses, which used to be very helpful, it kept us alive. then we will immediately respond with emotions, whether it's anger, greed, jealousy. I'll move to the positive ones: joy, happiness, enthusiasm. So again, emotional intelligence, we want to combine. We want to access these two parts of our brain when we're thinking about our actions and behavior. And the idea is the more that we do this, the more that we can develop new pathways. All right, now to give an example of emotional intelligence, I want to show you a clip. And this is from the movie Inside Out. And no joke, this was my family last night at the dinner table, which I was kind of chuckling at after it was over. So this is from the movie Inside Out. And the movie Inside Out, if you haven't seen it, it's a movie that talks about emotional intelligence. And this particular clip, it's the scene where the family has moved across the country. It's a father, mother, and daughter. And this is the dinner time when the daughter has finished her first day of going to a new school. So I'm going to show you this clip.
She's probing us.
I'm done. You pretend to be Joy.
What? Okay.
It was fine, I guess. I don't know. Oh, very smooth. That was just like Joy.
Something is definitely going on.
She's never acted like this before. What should we do?
We're gonna find out what's happening, but we'll need support. Signal the husband.
With a nice pass over the reed, comes across that right.
Uh-oh, she's looking at us. What did she say?
What? Oh, sorry, sir. No one was listening.
Is it garbage night? We left the toilet seat up. What? What is it, woman? What?
He's making that stupid face again.
I could strangle him right now.
Signal him again.
Ah, so, Riley, how was school?
You gotta be kidding me.
For this, we gave up that Brazilian helicopter pilot?
Boo, I'll be Joy.
School was great, all right?
Riley, is everything okay?
Sir, she just rolled her eyes at us.
What is her deal? All right, make a show of force. I don't want to have to put the foot down.
No, not the foot.
Riley, I do not like this new attitude.
Oh, I'll show you attitude over
No, 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 no. Stay happy!
What is your problem? Just leave me alone.
Sir, reporting high levels of sass.
Take it to DEFCON 2.
You heard that, gentlemen? DEFCON 2.
Listen, young lady, I don't know where this disrespectful attitude came from.
You want a piece of this, Pops? Come and get it!
Yeah, well...
Here it comes. Prepare the foot.
Keys to safety position. Ready to launch on your command, sir.
Just shut up!
Fire!
That's it. Go to your room. Now.
Foot is down. The foot is down.
Good job, gentlemen. That could have been a disaster.
Well, that was a disaster.
So this is, and it does remind me of my evening last night. And as I reminded my husband, though, you know, the 7-year-old or the 10-year-old or the 15-year-old, they don't have the skills to be able to control their emotions or to access their emotions. We're learning now that we need to teach them this at a very young age because they do have the skills to learn this. But it is up to, from a parenting perspective or auntie, uncle perspective, it's up to us to access our emotional intelligence. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, there's really 5 overarching areas that you'll hear discussed. So on the upper left-hand side, we have self-perception. Self-perception meaning, how do I perceive myself? Do I consider myself to be a confident person? Am I a person who can achieve my goals? Then moving to the left, we have self-expression. And this one is particularly, actually, they're all fascinating to me, but this one, so self-expression is, do I express myself? How do I express myself? Am I comfortable expressing all emotions or only a certain subset of emotions, like happiness, but I don't express my sadness or anger? And the other one with self-expression is, do I express myself differently with males or females? I recognize that we're also in Sweden, and I believe that Swedish people grow up with a more, excuse the term, advanced awareness of gender. So this could just also be an American thing when I think about, global outside of Sweden, when I think about people expressing themselves differently with males versus females. Interpersonal, so cutting to the chase, interpersonal is, do I connect with other people? And you all talked about that when you talked about the attributes of the person who inspired you. Decision-making. So decision-making, if we think about it am I the type of person that does loads of research, fact-based decision-making, or I'm a person who uses their emotions to take decisions, or do I do both? And then once I take a decision, how assertive am I in taking that decision, on taking action on that? And then lastly, we have stress management. And as I mentioned before, we're in the beginning or middle of a pandemic, and this is something that people are talking about. This is something that people are talking about around the world. Do I have the tools to manage what is happening right now? And the thing that I love about emotional intelligence is that this can be learned, meaning we're not born with a fixed amount of emotional intelligence. And it can be used in a variety of settings. So for example, it can be used with individuals who have actually mental health issues or mental health illness. To the other extreme, where Harvard and Google track their employees' emotional intelligence. Because people with higher emotional intelligence, they tend to be this term called better performers. Better performers meaning they have access to their emotions, they have a better sense of their own well-being, and they have access to other people's emotions and can create this overall sense of well-being, of connection. And I think you all have recognized your own days, right? When we have our good days and our bad days. So, and now I want to move on to talk about emotional intelligence and gender. Now, when we talk about emotional intelligence and gender, I want to distinguish between gender and sex. So gender being the social construct and sex being the X and Y chromosome. Or as I say to my daughter, I have a 7-year-old daughter, and as I say to her frequently, Mika, every night this happens, I say, Mika, gender is a construct. Society is a construct. Money is a construct. But 8 o'clock bedtime, kiddo, that is very, very real. Now, when we distinguish between gender and emotional intelligence, and this is outside of Sweden, so global emotional intelligence assessments, males and females score differently. And I'm thinking about this as a binary, and I don't think about gender as a binary, but for now we're talking about this as a binary because this is how the assessments are done at this point. Males and females score differently on emotional intelligence assessments. So females tend to score higher on empathy and self-awareness. Males tend to score higher on decision-making and assertiveness. And what I love about emotional intelligence is that it breaks down these gender barriers. Because as we know, we're not born with a male brain or a female brain. There is absolutely some biology, but a large amount of this is cultural. On a side note, if anybody is curious about I have a list of book recommendations if anybody would like to read more about this work. So the emotional intelligence really breaks down these gender barriers. So for example, in patriarchal societies, females tend to be less competitive than males. This is where this assertiveness comes in. But that actually reverses in certain matrilineal societies where females are actually more competitive than males. So this debunks any myth that our gender intelligence is based on some sort of X or Y chromosome, solely based on our X or Y chromosome. Our gender intelligence, like our emotional intelligence, is very much a social construct and can be developed at any time. And so I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but there's a question about when do we learn this emotional intelligence and when do we learn our gender intelligence? Specifically from a gender intelligence, babies begin identifying, acknowledging, learning gender when they're about 10 months old. And there was I have a TEDx talk that's on TED right now that talks about this. There was an article in Science magazine published in 2016 that shared that by the time boys and girls are 6 years old, that they both perceive that boys are smarter. And at that point, girls begin opting out of activities that are deemed to require intelligence or brilliance. Now, this was a US study. So this may not apply in Sweden, but I think it does apply in many, many, many other parts of the world. And if we think about the long-term implications of this without, as I call it, an intervention. Now, let's move on to talk about emotional intelligence, gender, and academia. And this was discussed yesterday. Rachel touched upon it this morning, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Is that there are differences in gender in academia, broadly speaking, and in science. And you all know this. And now since the pandemic happened, there's a number of things happening, whether it's females are quoted less on the pandemic or whether it's they're submitting less papers for publishing. As Rachel said, there are many things that have been written since March about how this is affecting gender, females in academia, and definitely females around the world, right? So my work it's global. So whether it's girls attending education, attending school, because we know that when a girl stops going to school, there's a good chance she may not go back to school because she's more of an asset at home. And it's similar with women in the workplace. So if a woman stops working, it's harder for her, it can be harder, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it can be harder for her to go back. And there is this income disparity when you compare it with males. Now, McKinsey, the global consulting firm, started doing research on women in the workplace. And in 2016, they published a paper that shared that if there was gender parity, that there's a possible $12 trillion that would be added to the global economy by 2025. Now, again, this was in 2016. Now, last week, McKinsey published another article. And what they said was that because of the pandemic, that gender equality is being challenged around the world. And academia is part of that. And I just wanted to quote what they said, because it's what is good for gender equality is good for society. And it's good for the economy. So this pandemic puts a truth into stark relief and raises critically important choices. And I think that's an important point to make, is that right now, as some budgets are being cut and research may need to be changed, that we have choices that we can make. And when we're making these choices, I think especially now, are we making these choices based on what is possible? In other words, if you look at the data on women, females, emotional intelligence, women in leadership positions, so is the fact that women aren't in leadership positions now because they're not good leaders? And is it is it a systemic issue? Is it a number of issues? And we can think about these from a systems perspective. So with all the work that I've done with women and men around the world, males and females, whether it's young Indian women who earn less than $2 a day, or whether it's Yale and Harvard and Ivy League economists, I realized that there's some key attributes, and I think the first one will very much resonate with you all. Because every person has the possibility of being a leader. right? Of building their emotional intelligence, of building their gender intelligence. So for me, it all begins with curiosity. So as individuals, we need to think about the things that are important to us. We have to become curious about how we're going to find the answers to solve some of the challenges that we're going to face every day. From there, what happens is we move to this place of conviction. Right? Conviction is when you say, this is what I take a stand for this. And once we have our conviction, it gives us the courage we need to step out into the world and become a better version of ourselves. And we also encourage others to do the same. Now, it's at this point, I believe, that we connect. And we connect with our colleagues, we connect with our friends, we connect with our families, and then we weave all of this together. Now, let's go back to curiosity, because I think the foundation of this all is curiosity. So curiosity is when we pause, and it's when we ask ourselves questions like, what matters to me? What are my values? And it's also when we begin to distinguish, what are the facts and what are the stories? What's the context? Because stories, while powerful and motivating, can also be debilitating if we live in them like they're true. Specifically those stories that disempower us, or the stories that disconnect us from others. Now, I want to take a moment and let's get curious about gender. Let's get curious about gender. And we're going to use the chat again, so get your fingertips ready. When is the moment that you've first learned gender? Meaning, when we're young, sometimes we are exposed to what it means to be male or what it means to be female. And we now know that our bias, our unconscious bias, can begin when we're pre-verbal. So what was your first memory of when you learned what it meant to be male or female? And I'll give an example. So when I was about 8 years old, and again, I grew up in Pennsylvania, the countryside. It was very Catholic, nothing against Catholicism. But you don't talk about sexuality or bodies or anything. So my mother gave me, and my mother wasn't practicing Catholic, but it was the culture. So my mother at 8 years old, she gave me this book and she walked away. And this book was about sex and about the human body. So I'm flipping through this book as an 8-year-old, and I get to this page and it has females and basically their breasts and different size breasts. So there's big breasts and small breasts and high breasts and low breasts. And I grew up in a Barbie culture, so I kind of picked out the breasts that I wanted, right? Like I was ordering them from Amazon. And it wasn't till I was 12 or 13 that I'm like looking what's going on, and this is not what I had ordered from Amazon. And I was very upset about this because no one had ever said, Lauri, your body is perfect as it is. And we generally don't tell females or males this. We're getting better, but there's still a lot of lip injections and all this sort of thing going on, right? We generally don't tell females it doesn't matter how you look, go out into the world and go be curious. So and there's one other story about gender. There was also a young man from Bhutan, and his first memory of gender was when his older sister, she was 12 or 13 at the time, he was 8, she was 12 or 13, and she started menstruating. And at that time in Bhutan, menstruating females were not allowed to share their meals with the family because they were considered unclean. So he learned at age 8 that he had a sort of gendered power over his sister, over other females. So if you have a memory now, what is your first memory of gender and what did you learn? Knowing, Jerome, that's great. Knowing in an unaware way gender difference exists around 15. Understanding what gender means around 23. Alina, around 7, 8, when my dad questioned my interest for space because I was a girl. When I started school, and a boy I played with was growing up, couldn't play with me anymore because I was a girl. I was 4, we were getting ready to attend a formal event, and I was forced to use spongy, uncomfortable dress because I was a female. When I had short hair and was called a bigger brother. Right, so we learn these things at a very young age, what it's meant to be male and what it's meant to be female. Interestingly, the female Nobel laureates, when they were asked this question, one of the most common response was that no one ever told them that they were a female. So I thought that was interesting. So once we have our curiosity, we move to this place, and feel free to keep sharing in the chat. This is being recorded, and I do want to share these with this group afterwards. So once we have our curiosity, we move to this place of conviction. And when we talk about conviction, it is really about taking a stand for something. It's when we say, this is what matters to me. I put my foot down for this. So, and the other thing about conviction, it's not initially, it's not an intellectual exercise. Conviction is something that initially begins in our hearts. And sometimes, it's like this. We say, okay, this is it. I have this vision. Other times it's unclear. It may not have a shape or a form, or it might not have color. But if we sit with it, it evolves into something that's very clear. So for you today, what is one thing that you recognize that you take a stand for? It could be your research. It could be a child or a parent or a friend. It could be public health. So what's one thing that you take a stand for? And I'm gonna, if you want to include that in the chat as well, I would love to see some of your responses. I hear you, Catherine. I messed up on the slide.
No, I'm nervous. I spelled it wrong.
Clean water. Yeah. Fact-based decisions, access to clean water for everyone, taking care of the environment, the right for my 3-year-old son to wear dresses, clean water. Right to housing, education, the importance of PhD students. So once we have our conviction, you can keep adding them if you have thoughts. Once we have our conviction, we need some courage. And courage to step out into the world. And courage is really about taking that first step. And once we take that first step over and over and over again, we begin to build our confidence. But the first step always requires courage. Now, the author, there's an American author, Elizabeth Gilbert, and she has what I find to be a wonderful story about courage. And she said that when she was younger and she would embark on a new project, or she had to have a conversation with someone, you know, there's this kind of exhilarating, nervous feeling that she would have. And what would inevitably happen is that fear would show up. And sometimes fear discouraged her. She would listen to the fear and it would discourage her from moving forward on something. Now that she's older, she recognizes that it's normal for fear to show up. And courage and fear are like siblings. So now what happens when she's embarking on a project and she imagines herself driving in a car and she's driving and this project or the conversation, whatever it might be, is next to her. She's driving the car and all of a sudden fear shows up. And now what she does is she looks at fear in the face and says, "Fear, I knew you would show up, you always do. But fear, you have to sit in the back seat. You are not allowed to drive." Now, once we have our courage, the next thing we need to do as we start stepping out is connecting with other people. And connecting can be done in a number of different ways. So connecting can be done by negotiating. Connecting can be done by listening. It can be done by silence. Obviously, it can be done by a dialogue and by general speaking. And it also can be done by empathy and compassion and humility. And I want to talk specifically, actually I want to go back to I mentioned negotiating, because some people think negotiating is, they enjoy negotiating, and other people think they fear negotiating. And negotiating from a connecting perspective, there was some research done. So there are females who, in certain universities, Ivy League universities, some of them can attend or sign up for a leadership type of training. And negotiating is part of that training. So what JPAL, Esther Duflo, JPAL and IPA did was that they replicated that type of negotiating training. And they did it in Zambia with 8th and 9th grade females. Because with 8th and 9th grade females, they were dropping out of school. So the idea is if you teach these young women, young girls, negotiating skills, what happens? And what they found was that this similar type of education that young women receive at Ivy League and prestige institutions, you teach the same type of negotiating skills to young women in Zambia. So not only were they staying in school, but they had decreased pregnancies. They were staying in school longer. They had more positive career outcomes. They were earning more money. And they also had, which I think is interesting, they also had positive relationships with their family. Because having a 7-year-old, when she negotiates with me, I can't say this is always going to be a positive thing if this continues. I'm joking, please. But these young women had positive relationships with their families. So the other part of connecting that I want to discuss is this, going back to this compassion piece. Now, at one point I was working with an organization and the CIO told me that I had a compassionate baseball bat. And I wasn't sure how to take that. And then he and I were talking about it because I asked him. And what I realized is that this type of compassion that I had, this compassionate baseball bat, was something called fierce compassion. And fierce compassion is when we take our curiosity, we stand in our conviction, we're having courage, we're stepping out, and we're connecting with others through our fierce compassion. And as Rachel said earlier, fierce compassion is something that is, this were not her words, these are my words, but it grows in your heart, and it's about creating a better world. And excuse what I'm about to say, but it's based on love, it's not based on fear. And we see examples of fierce compassion. We definitely see a lot of fierceness, and I apologize for bringing US politics into this, and in other parts of the world as well. We are seeing fierceness. We're not seeing as much compassion. So when we think about fierce compassion. It can be done at the individual level, right? Or it can be done at a collective level, at a societal level. From an individual level, one example is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And what she did for female equality or gender equality, I need to correct myself, because it was really about ensuring that males and females were treated equally. And it was when she came to Sweden and early on in her career, and she saw that over 50% of the law students were female, and that there was a judge, I believe, who was 6 or 7 months pregnant, who was still working, that she understood that the state's role in ensuring that gender equality can actually happen. And I think listening to Rita Colwell speak yesterday as well, and her fierce compassion about her research, about public health, about data-driven policy, and also about gender equality. These are examples of fierce compassion. And from a collective perspective is the women's suffrage movement. And when we think about this, it took up a little over 100 years, but over the course of 100 years, individual by individual, community, country by country, women around the world, except for in Vatican City, have achieved the right to vote. And it's not perfect everywhere, but the policy is in place. So at this particular moment, right, we are in a beginning or middle of a pandemic. We have our emotional intelligence, we have our gender intelligence, and we have choices to make. So with that, I want to leave you with this. It's from the movie Hidden Figures, and I won't say anything else because I believe it speaks for itself.
Hampton High School is a white school, Mrs. Jackson.
Yes, Your Honor, I'm aware of that.
Virginia, still a segregated state.
Your Honor, you of all people should understand the importance of being first.
How's that, Mrs. Jackson?
Well, you were the first in your family to serve in the armed forces, U.S. Navy, the first to attend university.
What's the point?
I plan on being an engineer at NASA, but I can't do that without taking them classes at that all-white high school. And I can't change the color of my skin. So I have no choice but to be the first, which I can't do without you, sir. Your Honor, out of all the cases you're gonna hear today, which one is gonna matter 100 years from now? Which one is gonna make you the first?
No protocol for women attending. There's no protocol for a man circling.
So the pandemic is potentially reversing gender equality. The pandemic is affecting people's emotional intelligence and well-being. So right now we have a choice to make. Whether it's about gender equality, whether it's about emotional intelligence and health, mental health. We can make a choice to develop the Esther Duflos of the world, the Rita Colwells of the world. We can advance science for the sake of the research, for the sake of the output, for the sake of the policies. For all disciplines, not only for the sake of gender parity, but for the sake of the innovation. So my final question for you is, what actions are we going to take to be on the right side of history? Thank you. Now, thank you. So taking a step back, thank you everyone for listening. We have about 10 minutes. And if anyone has any questions that you'd like to ask or any comments, you can feel free to raise your hand or type them, whatever you prefer.
because we're in the same room, I can't.
I think Karin has a question.
Great. Please also turn on your videos if you want.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Lauri.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you. Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
So about the studies that have been done on the effect of the pandemic on gender equality. I mean, can you be a bit more specific? What's been seen? I've only seen one study where basically they said that women were staying at home taking care of the kids and are not able to write, but that's the only thing I know of. So maybe you could provide some more background.
Sure. So there was another study, and I can share it with you. I can give you the resource afterwards. That shared that females are being less females, while there are more females in epidemiology, that they're being quoted less in the news. So that was another study that was done from an academic science perspective. Do you want to say?
No, I mean, there's also been some commentaries in Science in the maybe in April or May, just less citations and less. Actually, they had done the same number of publications from a year previous. So that's one thing that was. But I haven't been looking. So specifically, is that females are submitting less papers for publishing, and that goes back to your point of that they are outside of Sweden, that they are staying at home, and that gender equality starts at home, or can start at home, right? And it's, I mean, listen, it's a tough situation, right? If someone is a researcher and your spouse is a physician, your partner is a physician. So I'm not saying that these issues are black and white, but it is challenging if you are a female. If you are a female at home, Caroline, yes.
I just thought it was so interesting when you just said gender equality starts at home, because it reminded me of what Rita was talking about yesterday, Rita Caldwell, when she was saying how, you know, the reason there were people in her life that enabled her to become this incredible world-renowned microbiologist, and how her father said that it was that it wasn't even a question that she would go to college, and how she had such a supportive spouse. And similar to what you were saying about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I've read a lot about her since she passed and before she passed. And one of the things that she always said was how supportive her husband was of her. And she said it was because he was so confident in himself that he wasn't threatened by her, and how impressive she was. And that helped to enable her to become the woman that she was. So I think the statement, gender equality starts at home, is a very powerful statement, very impacting. I didn't have a question. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. You want to share?
Yeah, if you unshare, I can share.
I'm going to unshare for one moment. Yeah. And Rachel is going to be sharing something that she's been working on.